Oh, John,
Hello, Oliver.
there's a lot of talk at the moment about the farmers and climate change, and they're getting a rough time. I remember in the 80s and the 90s, the farmers were told to spread as much slurry, as much 10, 10, 20, and the whole lot on the land, and dig huge drains and remove ditches and bulldoze everything, and use strip grazing. And now it's all changed. The EU are telling them, you have to do things differently now. You have to invest more money. So they invested their money, they modernised their farms, they took out huge bank loans, and now they have to do the same again because the EU got it wrong.
See, this is the trouble with the EU. Um, I mean, uh, countries are all different, and in this country we've been blessed with a farm advisory body called CHIGOSC. It's an Irish agriculture, and they have research stations in Wexford and around the country. And they do a lot of research of what's beneficial for farmers. But I have a feeling that their views have been superseded by this ridiculous EU with their what they call a common agricultural policy. You can't have a common agricultural policy. What you want to allow for is each country to make the best use of its own resources. Now, if Ireland had been permitted to do that, we wouldn't have had the problem of the pollution in the rivers and the lakes that has occurred since the advice from the EU about draining land and all the rest of it, and then allowing slurry to be spread on the land, which heretofore it was manure, which was very beneficial for the environment and for the land. The slurry created such a stink for the average person passing the field that had slurry in it. You'd have to hold your nose for a good bit, and you'd wonder how anybody could stick it or even work at that kind of thing, or even why it would be beneficial for cattle to be grazing on that land subsequently when that slurry has gone into the ground. But some of that slurry probably found its way into the environment, into the lakes, and so hence there's a lot of people that have what they call water schemes that they paid in for big money, but some of them now they can't drink the water, and they often have pollution caused from this sort of thing that the EU promoted years ago. So now here they are interfering with the farmers again.
Absolutely. I mean, look, they focus a lot on emissions. Well, that's what we hear all the time, the emissions from cows. I think what they really need to focus on, I've experience of being on a dairy farm, what they really need to focus on is getting fertiliser right, the amount of fertiliser, and particularly as well the drainage, okay? So what they need is smart drains. If you're going to put drains down into a field, have smart drains. They need smart dikes, like little dams almost, right? Very similar to a water scheme,
Correct.
where if you have excess nitrogen or urea, whatever you have excess fertiliser, it can be treated and perhaps even recycled to be used again, rather than letting it go into the dikes,
Exactly.
the bigger dikes,
Yeah.
and into the rivers
Because
and the
I
wells.
often saw ditches and dikes that before any of this EU stuff, the water would be in there, and but it wouldn't be as polluted as it was subsequent to all the slurry and what have you. I have a feeling that this slurry was introduced something courtesy of the EU for some reason. I can't imagine CHIGOSC in the Irish advice recommending that, because up to that it was manure, and manure was very beneficial for the growing of vegetables and all sorts, and there was no such thing as this obnoxious smell, and I never heard of them having to have slurry tanks and all the rest of it. Whatever way that was done, it was done very well, and that was the system that worked very well in the country and had brought on the quality of the cattle. Because in the 30s the cattle was very poorly nourished and suffered from a lot of diseases, unfortunately, because they didn't have the money and the money wasn't there to develop it. But as we prospered and the farmers prospered, before we ever joined the EU, the quality of the cattle improved, and so they weren't as diseased, because they had a TB eradication scheme and all the rest of it, that apparently the vets were paid for and all the rest of it, and it never seemed to eradicate that much. They used to blame badgers. But I'm just mentioning these things as the way the quality of the beef and cattle and sheep and all the rest of it improved with the use of what they used for to bring it on. There was no talk of pollution much. I think it was only when they went in for this kind of factory farming of pigs and that kind of thing, that we began to have some problems in that area. This is to be looked at very carefully. Now, here the EU now is, as far as I can see, making it very difficult for farmers to be able to run their business in the way that best suits their particular requirements. They're being obliged now to sort of something to do with the climate to reduce what this climate nonsense calls emissions. Now, that means, in simple terms, get out of cattle. That's what that means. That means meat becomes scarce, because this is what this Madrid conference was yapping about that I spoke about earlier. To sort of get rid of that. So this is an underhand way of doing it, that their emissions have to be cut by 50% and all the rest of it. And yapping about cattle and sheep. That was the staple diet when we could afford it years ago, to have a nice bit of meat and all the rest of it. It wasn't that often we could have it. Beneficial to the body and soul, because Christopher Monk mentions that there was something about the vegetarian option years ago, which he took because it was promoted as being healthy, and he wasn't long about developing diabetes from the lack of meat, and he wasn't long giving it up, and he got rid of the diabetes, and the obesity and all the rest of it that's caused is by people following diets that's not conducive. Eating meat is very conducive for a good quality diet and all the rest of it. Have you ever met a vegetarian with a decent colour in their face? I haven't, and honest to goodness, don't go to their house because they don't know how to even make a sandwich.
Well, a friend of mine, he became a vegetarian last year, and I met him in the park on his first week, and he looked really, really healthy. He'd started his new jogging regime, which he'd jog every day. So at that point, he was eating meat all his life. He looked really, really healthy because he'd been jogging about for maybe a week or two.
Yes.
I met him a year later, and the bones were coming through his face, and he looked really, really gaunt and unhealthy, you know? I mean, people argue that if you eat meat, you're going to have a shorter life, but it's not necessarily true, okay?
It's not
Because
true.
what actually happens is, okay, if you eat meat, you're likely to die of heart complaints, and if you're a vegetarian, you will die of a stroke. That's what they say.
You'll die with malnutrition because it's not a balanced diet.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what anyone says about it. And as a matter of fact, they're a bit like other organisations that represent a small minority and then try to influence the majority. This is what they're at. This is the EU again interfering, but in an underhand way, talking about they have to meet targets.
Yeah.
Now, they can take a jump at themselves. If we had a proper Minister for Agriculture, that's what he'd be telling them to do.
That's it.
And stand up and be counted.
Oh.
He's supposed to represent farmers, not the miserable EU. And farmers should be allowed to, have done a very good job in the last 40, 50 years before we ever joined the EU. And I think since they joined that, they've been put to the pin of their collar, borrowing money that they shouldn't have had to borrow at all. They should have been able to do things the way they do, sensibly and prudently, because you couldn't meet a more prudent person than a farmer. He's on the go 365 days a year. Does he get a day off? Not that I recall much. Now sometimes they do because they can get somebody in to do the needful. But giving them the least amount to do, especially if they're milking cows, which some farmers still have, thank goodness, otherwise we wouldn't have milk. We'd have to import it, I suppose. The same as we have to import vegetables. And at this rate of going, we'll be importing milk. And this long-lasting milk that will poison you, because you don't know who it's come out of.
Yeah, I just want to go back in a second to the slurry and what you were talking about. Yeah, I'll come back to that in a second. But while we're on the topic there of the EU, we done a video there a while back where we're talking about the Anglo-Free Trade Act of 1965. So back then, the EU, or the EEC as it was called, looked very, very promising for the farmer, because once the Anglo-Free Trade Act was signed, we could join the EEC, and it opened up the market. So the farmers in the first year of it could actually export 600,000 cattle to the EU. So it looks great, and they've done well for the first 15, 20 years maybe.
It did,
But
because it was run in the economic way that was set up for the European Economic Community, and it was beneficial to farmers and people in this country and in other countries that were in it, because it benefited and it enabled them to be on the land and that. But then they started going peculiar. They were talking about big farms and all other old nonsense, and farmers don't want all to be big farmers. They don't want to be multi-millionaires.
that's where the slurry tank came in. So what actually happened was, before slurry in the 1980s, right, you had outside the milking parlour, or what was they were called stalls,
Yeah,
okay?
that's right.
So you'd have a farmer who had 40 to 60 cows, and outside the stalls where the cows get milked, you had what was called a dung heap,
That's right.
and you'd often see the grass growing on top of it.
Correct.
So that would be spread on the land.
Great nourishment for the land.
Yeah, but it was kind of thick, and it would take.
Correct. That was manure.
It would take. It wasn't really. It didn't give you quick results. So it would take lumps of manure would have to break down on the soil and the
So
whole
in
lot.
other words, it was using the land as it should be used.
Yeah, it
Slow,
was.
slow.
Yeah, it was. Okay. But the thing is, anyway,
Speed.
and then they introduced the industrial farming and the slurry tank and the EU with their grants and the whole lot, and that's where it appears to have all gone wrong.
Of course it has gone wrong. And so now they're coming along with some other old cod. First of all, the business of slurry should have never been permitted, and quite sure Chagos would have never permitted, but they were probably ordered.
Yeah.
The same as a lot of what you think is independent organisations is ordered to do various things that they normally wouldn't do. Now, as regards the business of the slurry, that was the worst thing that they ever did.
Yeah.
It kind of showed the public that there was a stink from farms.
That's right.
You see these kind of tanks going along, these things with tanks, slurry tanks, and the next thing is they're spewing out this thing in the land, and the smell is obnoxious. And I think that tells you something. If you were going into a restaurant and you got a smell like that, you wouldn't eat anything, would you?
That's right.
And then why should you eat anything off a land where you have that kind of stuff spread? The manure was slow but sure, and that is the only way to do anything. Slow but sure. Forget about speed. We're not in the jet age. If you want to go to America in 5 hours, well and good. Maybe some people might like to go in 4 hours and want a supersonic jet. Well, what's the point of that? So it's the same way with the farmers. Slow but sure, and that's the way they were doing things until the EU put their snout into the trough, and they've destroyed the farms. And here they're at it again. And Creed, the Minister for Agriculture, and it's funny enough when I saw it here, I didn't know who he was, because there was a good Minister for Agriculture in the past. Now we haven't got good ministers for agriculture, and because they're following the dictates of the EU, a proper minister would try to look out for the welfare of Irish farmers and support them in every shape, way or form, and get rid of that slurry.
That's it.
That's my view.
Yeah, it just appears like they're trying to make farming so unprofitable that people will be forced into forestry. And if we're forced into forestry, we do end up with a situation like what you're talking about, where we'll actually be importing milk.
Correct.
And all we'll be totally reliant on other countries, which is not good.
Well, you see, that's the EU. That's their probably ultimate agenda. They have an agenda, so they go about it by stealth. This is an example to me of by stealth. Farmers, John Malone, the Christian and Jobs Active Party, suggested farmers resist that with all your might, and stop spreading slurry. For goodness sake, wake up and think what your fathers and grandfathers did. The manure that did good for land and good for the environment, good for everybody.
That's it. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Albert.